Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. I am so excited for today's guests. I've been following this company for over 8 years now. I've watched them become a leader in their space, all while bootstrapping the company. Co-founders, co-CEOs, John Fazzolari and Anthony Serina, welcome.
Thank you, David.
What's up, Dave? Welcome. So happy to be here.
It's awesome. Awesome. It's good to have you guys here. All right, let's start with you, Anthony. Maybe just in one or two sentences, can you tell us what Revivin does?
Sure. What we do at Revivin is we help large companies recycle and repurpose all their outdated IT hardware. We then refurbish that hardware and provide affordable computer access to consumers.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's start with you with always the first question that I start with. What is something that you've done at Revivin, big or small, that's had a massive impact that you will definitely do at future companies if you're CEO again?
Yeah, for sure. So we're an in-office culture, as you know. We're in the office 4 days a week, but we're remote every single Wednesday. And me personally, on Wednesdays, what I do is I don't take any internal meetings. And so that day I'll have some external meetings, but mostly it's for myself. And the way I like to think about it, David, is space favors offense. And that's a day a week that's really dedicated towards doing all the deep dives, whether it's the research on a specific topic, whether it's looking over a specific department, that's really doing well and want to understand exactly what's going on. So that individual time and creating that space during the week has been incredibly, incredibly successful for myself as well as John.
Have you always been in office?
Always. Yes. We've always been
from the beginning.
From the day we started. Yeah.
What happened during COVID? Did you work remotely for some period?
Yeah. So during COVID, when the pandemic hit in March, the company went to a remote structure, just like kind of everyone did. No one kind of exactly knew what was going on. But actually, David, that fall, if you remember, we actually brought people back to the office, and we were actually in the office, on a couple of days a week earlier on. And then, if you remember, it's kind of like, COVID would spike, and then we would go remote, and there was a little bit of back and forth. But as long as we felt it was safe during the pandemic and the different time periods, we always kept some amount of office presence.
And do you think that has been a competitive advantage to you? Has that been a challenge for you in terms of, when you think about hiring people and you think about building your team, how has that played out for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, it makes it more challenging. It also makes it more rewarding. And then our employee NPS is very high. So the way I like to think about it is kind of like anything in life, the harder it is to build, the longer it lasts, type of a thing. So yes, it is more challenging to get employees. It is more challenging to actually run, right? Also, I think just even having 1 day remote and building your office cadence and all that stuff takes a lot of planning. But when you get the right people and they're bought in and they're excited about it, David, there's a whole group of people out there that want to come into the office. They want the excitement. They want to build the relationships. They want to learn. They want to be in that apprentice type model where they're sitting next to someone that has more experience than them, and that person's dedicating the time, right? And all the stuff, you call it the water cooler, or all the serendipity, right? The small things that you just can't create online. I think that we're not the only ones that enjoy it. Actually, we know for a fact, because we get the feedback from the employees that work here. It creates a pretty special environment, and something that used to be standard, right, has now become something that isn't as popular as it once worked, but it works for us.
It's interesting because I've actually seen more and more companies going back to the office and actually talking to people earlier in their career who are looking to be in office. And I've been to your office obviously many times, and you feel an energy there that you can't you can't feel when you're on Zoom. And I like your model because I do like that one day where people can be remote, because you can get a lot done when you're by yourself at home, no distractions. But there's something about the culture and the camaraderie, and you just feel a different energy around a company. And again, I'm seeing it change. I'm actually talking to people who are 2, 3, 4 years out of school saying they've never been in an office and they feel now like they're missing out. It sounded great, all the flexibility, but now there's a realization, maybe I'm missing out. And that feels I think we're going to see a continuous trend back into the office for a lot of companies. John, how about you? Same question. Something you've done at Revivin, big or small, that's had a big impact that you would do at any future company that you're a CEO of.
Yeah, totally. For me, it's definitely the Revivin way, David. So we've always had a strong culture here with a lot of values, but we never really wrote those down until later on into the company. And I think that Anthony and I took a lot of stuff for granted that we didn't realize was so important to building a company culture. So early on, we were like, oh, everybody knows the values, everybody knows what we care about. But then you keep going and the company gets bigger and you realize how explicit and organic these things have to be if you really want to scale. And we really took this exercise and spent a lot of time on it. And I remember thinking, how are we spending so much time on this? I need to be talking to customers. I have all this other stuff I need to be doing. But what I realized was when we wrote the values down and we did a company kickoff and we really basically explained the whole story of every single value, from the rigatoni rule to work with your hands, show up, earn it, no excuses. Everybody started to understand how our company history tied into what we do now over a decade later. So I don't think, starting a company, you really have to nail those values down. They definitely evolve as a company changes and grows. But to me, it's like it was an amazing game changer. And now every day people walk in here in the office, they see it on the wall and they know what we're all about from their first day at Revivin.
How long did it take you to actually get those values? I mean, the values you have today that you mentioned, could you have written those same values down day one when you two started the company?
On day one, no, we couldn't have. I think we could have described them and we knew what we were about, but it was like probably almost a 3-month process to write them down. We actually have like a book that people get when they start at Revivin. It's called the Revivin Way. It documents values and it actually has explicit stories, whether it's like a pop culture thing in the movies or a TV show, or something that happened in Revivin's history, to really make sure people understand what it means. And even going further, we re-onboard people because we want to go through the values again with them. So for us, this is a consistent thing that we're constantly driving through our culture, David.
Can you let's just use an example? I love rigatoni rule. So let's talk about rigatoni rule for a second. What is that? Where did that come from? How does that play out today?
Yeah, so the rigatoni rule, we realized how important this was to us. I think like after Reviving started growing and getting a lot more successful, really what it means is it's unreasonable hospitality, but we don't believe unreasonable hospitality is unreasonable at all. And it's really about how you make people feel, whether it's your customers, employees, or anybody, any vendor we interact with at Revivin. So I think about David, when I met you for the first time over 10 years ago, every time I met you, I sent you an email. We always connected. We stayed in touch. And I never really expected anything of it. But look where we are today now, 10 years later. It's a really special thing. So with our customers, we really go the extra mile with them to really understand them, who they are as a person. What do they like to do outside of work? We do dinners and community stuff together to really get to know them. And I think that when you give people that extra experience, it's just a game changer. Anthony and I can be very picky people. So when we go out somewhere, I want the best experience possible. And if anybody's going to be working with me, I want to give them that experience as well. Whether they're walking into our office, I'm walking into theirs, we're going on a collection with them. We do everything we can there. And I think that having done that over the past 10 years, the results have really shown. I remember early on, Anthony and I would write a personal handwritten thank you card to every single person that we met with, customer, person, anybody that gave us their time, because we just realized how grateful we were that people were supporting us before we were at the stage we're at now.
And how does that manifest itself actually in the business? Like when you think about rigatoni rule and you think about all these customers that you've done with over a decade now that you've done this with these customers, how has that, is there an actual business impact to that?
Yes, definitely, because the relationships that we have drive the trust we have with our customers. So one thing about Revivin is we're repurposing hundreds of thousands of machines annually for these customers. They're giving us their computers on every different continent all over the world. There's an immense amount of trust that comes with
Mm,
that. So I'm always going in there, and as is Anthony, we meet people. I remember the first time I started meeting customers, I'd be like, "Have you ever met the person that takes your electronics, your e-waste?" And they're like, I don't know. It's like this weird thing. They come in a truck and I'm like, it's me. I'm right here. There's nothing, come into our facilities. People visit our facilities. They take a tour. We explain the process to them. I think that before Reviving was started, there was an underappreciation for what goes into refurbishing and repurposing hardware, especially the impact it has on people. So I think showing the customers that and driving those relationships with them has led to results in our business that we wouldn't be here today without.
Yeah, I think especially because for you, your customer, it's the IT team, it's the IT leader, it's the IT person, and I feel like that audience, it takes a lot for them to trust a vendor, in my opinion, in all my experience, and it feels like when they do, they trust you really forever. If you can prove to them that you're going to do that job, and they'll come back over and over at every company that they go to. And I think that that's one of those things where, a big value of Better Cloud is strive to delight. And it's the same kind of thing, which is going above and beyond things that people couldn't even imagine you would do for them, doing that for them. And it's amazing. I don't know if have you seen the Bear show on Hulu or whatever, on FX, and they have that episode where they're going over the top in the restaurant, and it feels, in the way that I've seen you do the rigatoni roll, feels kind of very similar to that.
Exactly, totally, and I think the thing about it is it's not over the top at Reviving. That's our expectation, in terms of that. So I think that when you normalize that across your culture and you set that expectation, the customer has an amazing experience, and the way you make them feel every time you interact with them really makes them want to build that relationship and come back to Reviving.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, so both of you talking about things that, at least in my opinion, it's hard, to be in an in-office culture, to have these values and really live by these values, give everyone a book, put it on the wall. It is finding the right team, finding the right people is challenging. I think based on that. How do you do that? Maybe we'll start with you, Anthony, of like when you think about the interview process, when you think about the hiring process, the recruitment process, how do you think about making sure that people are going to live up to that bar and that are going to be a good fit for the company?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, something that we think about all the time. I think the first thing that comes to mind, David, is we care a lot more about a person's story than their credentials. And I think that's something that's extraordinarily important to us. We want to understand not where did you go to college, right? Not exactly what your first job out of school was, but the why behind you made the different
Mm,
life decisions and why you chose the path that you chose, right? And learning more about them as people is something that we take very seriously about in the interview process, and something's really exciting for us, right? So, we love to hear, and then there's specific things that we're always looking for, right? During those stories, we love to hear people having their first jobs very early on in life. Even better if they work their way through college. That's
mm,
even more exciting to us, right? And also understanding the different types of adversity they kind of face with each different phase of life or each different season of life. Um, and so that's incredibly important to us at Revivin. And we value that definitely a lot more so than I would think other companies, right? And now,
mm.
granted, of course, credentials matter, right? We can't hire a developer that doesn't know how to code. Um, you know, so so that the credentials are important to us, but we'll always be able to, as a company, when people have really great stories and exhibit a lot of grit throughout their life, which is super important, which is something that we're looking for throughout them telling their own story. We'll take a degree hit on skill, for a great story and a person that we believe is coming in with a lot of grit. And ultimately, a lot of people who value those things usually come into our organization, and for them, they absolutely love it, right? And we could see it across the board with, when you look at attrition at Revivin, um, it's not like people never leave, but it is quite rare.
And John, when you think about the people, to your point, Anthony, about attrition, and most people have been there for a while. When you think about the people who have joined, who are the people who have really done exceptionally well at the company? You've hired, I must be hundreds of people over the years. Who are the people who really stand out?
Yeah, I think people that one, they're comfortable with the ambiguity of a startup and change because
Mm,
they have trust. So I think early on, I think some people walk into an office or a company and they say, okay, what's my path here? And the reality is that a path is paved as a company grows. And I think the people that understand, hey, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to do whatever the team needs to do to get it done. And then I trust that that path will come, are extremely successful here. Because when you think about startups, I know Reid Hoffman talks about there's a tour of duty you do at a company. And I think as long as we're communicating, hey, this is the tour of duty you're on at this time. And then after a certain period of time, that changes and you go on to another tour. The most successful people at Revivin have several tours of duty that they've been on that may be
mm.
completely different because, as you know, David, you're a startup for 2 years. The next stage is a completely different. You need different things, you need different skills. And the people that push themselves, they keep evolving their skills and they're open to feedback, have had tremendous success here.
Two things that we heard is grit and being okay with the change and being okay with the ambiguity. And I think those two are probably the most important things that you need to look for in an early stage employee, because things are going to change. It's actually guaranteed. It is guaranteed that things are going to change, and it's guaranteed that it's going to be hard, right? It's one of the things that after 20 years, I always think to myself, oh, maybe it was just because of this company we were in this situation, that's why it was hard. Then the next company, maybe just because of this situation, that's why it was hard. It's just, in reality, it's just hard. And you need people who are ready for that, and who thrive in that. Actually, again, you do see people who say, who do well in those environments, and it's hard though to interview for that. I think that it takes a lot of reps, in my opinion, to identify those people, and to your point, Anthony, to understand what questions to ask them that are going to get to what you're trying to find out, and get under the covers on that. So let's talk a little bit about the role of co-CEO. I am very opposed to the co-CEO role, as you guys know. Since I met you 10 years ago, I've been saying that, but you have made it work. And I've changed my tone, at least for the two of you and your company. I think, you've made it work. Maybe we start with you, John. Why do you think it works? And do you think in general it works? Do you think this is something other companies should do?
Yeah, so I think it works because, well, first thing is early on, everybody told us we couldn't do it. And I remember Anthony was a little bit nervous too because he was like, John, I don't know how we do this. They're all telling us that. And I was very insistent on it. I looked up every company, Dave, that was successful that had a co-CEO. And you know what the first one I found was? Atlassian. So anytime somebody was like, oh, you can't do it, I was like, Atlassian looks like a pretty good company and they're bootstrapped and they still have co-CEOs. So that was like my opener on that. But I think for us, it works for a bunch of reasons. One, we've known each other, I think, almost 20 years now. So we really know each other well. Like when we look at each other, I almost feel like we could like tell how we're feeling, how we're doing, what's going on. There's like this real connection there. The other thing is that we've split our functions. So early on, we would try to do the same thing. Everybody would report into John and Anthony at Revive, and it was a whole thing. And we refused to split our functions. We were like out of control with it. And then we realized we're like, all right, we have to split some stuff up. And, Anthony took more of the product and engineering, and I took more of the go to market. We still aligned on everything, but I think that was really helpful. And then I think that we're always working on alignment and we use conflict to find the right answers versus caring about who is right. So
Mm.
there's several times in the company where me and Anthony were going back and forth. He was like, we have to do it this way. I was like, we have to do it this way. But that respectful conflict and that trust actually drove us to the right answer. And we don't keep counts on that. We're just doing it because we genuinely are aligned with the same long term goal. And when you have that much alignment and you have the same skin in the game, and you're motivated by the same things, I think you have the opportunity for a tremendous outcome at a company like Revivin. In terms of what I recommended for other companies, probably not. To be honest, probably not. I mean, I think that I meet a lot of founders out there like, I'm looking for my co-founder. And then you want to go like 50-50 on something. I think it has to evolve over time. You have to have such a trust and a relationship with somebody where it's a very tricky thing to nail down. But I remember taking it personally because I would come to your office and I would almost not want to talk about it because I was like, he always says this in every meeting I had with you. I always called Anthony after, and I was like, I met with that guy Politis again. He doesn't like the CEO co-CEO thing, but I was like, but we have to keep doing it. And it was a real thing that we really believed in. And I think as we got stronger over time, we're like, we definitely can do this.
Anthony, what do you think as CEOs? How do you think you've evolved or your jobs have evolved? Because, the company was, 2 people and now it's hundreds of people. How have the jobs evolved over time? How have you evolved as CEOs, as a CEO yourself?
For sure. I think a lot about in terms of leadership, right? And how are we communicating the vision? The biggest thing that I've learned, and David, I don't know how it's been with you, your previous companies, but I find that no matter how much we communicate something, we could always communicate more of it. It's super interesting because when we first started the company, it was all about finding product market fit, right? And it was like, what should we do? What should we do? And I find our entire jobs now around how, right? And I have this thesis where after a company has legitimate product market fit, as long as they're in a really big market, getting to, that 100 million in revenue is simply about execution, but execution is really, really hard. And execution comes through other people, right? Which I think is kind of what you were referencing. And so now I'm thinking a lot really just about how do we get the best people and put them in the best position to succeed. And then ensure that we're communicating the vision so they could understand exactly how their function helps us go and achieve our goals. And it's something that we're constantly working through. But that's been the biggest evolution versus actually doing all the work. Many years we just did the work, and figuring out, for the most part, empowering people to do their jobs. But then also there is a point in time at every company and every function where sometimes you need to get your hands a little dirty. And so how do you balance those two things, right? Empowering people on one end, and then on the other end, when do you really want to dig in and really do a deep dive on a particular subject?
I feel like that's actually the hardest. I don't know for other entrepreneurs, but I feel like that's the hardest thing because you got to where you were by doing, and then you really have to step out and, to your point, communicate, manage, delegate, but then you can't get too far away,
right?
Because actually the way that you got there is because you were in the weeds. I have found that in my entire career, for me personally, to be the hardest thing because I really enjoy doing work. And I think that as the company gets bigger and bigger, it really becomes about the people and about the communication, about setting the vision, the strategy. When I talk to CEOs who have 1,000 employees, 2,000 employees, they're not really doing very much work on a day-to-day basis. They're really just managing the team and recruiting and inspiring and motivating. And so I do think that that's it's hard. It's a hard change to make. Let's talk about, a really important part of this podcast for me is making sure that people hear about the challenges that other entrepreneurs and other CEOs have faced in their careers and on their journeys. So, Anthony, for you, what is the biggest challenge Revivin has ever faced? Did you get through that challenge? How did you get through that challenge? If you could just give us as much detail as you're willing to give of that, of what that was, that would be great.
Without a doubt. It was the first 3 years that we started the company. We bootstrapped the business. John and I took, everything that we had saved from our first jobs and we put it into the company, right? And it was kind of this binary outcome where it was going to work or I don't know what we were going to do. And it was really, I would say, a year into that, right? I think when anyone starts a company, there's just so much excitement around it, right? You have a new idea, you have a new concept, you're out on your own, you have this kind of, you're a bit like pirates, right? And there's this excitement to it. And I think that the excitement is able to withstand all the natural setbacks that every entrepreneur has, right, along the journey. But a year into it, we did not have product market fit. And we weren't close to finding product market fit. We didn't know that in hindsight, know that now. And we spent another 2 years trying to find product market fit. And, it was really just John and I, in cafes, in apartments. We wouldn't even get share spaces. Like we would not get a WeWork because we're like, that's too expensive. And we just got super crafty with everything that we did, from how we ate. A lot of funny stories about, turkey burgers, and a lot of different things that we used to like make and freeze. And the way we used to handle our living situation was, how do we spend the least amount of money possible to buy us time to figure this out? So what ended up happening was we were out of money. So we were going to be out of money in 2 or 3 months. And we applied to all these accelerators. And we're like, it was basically, it was like the Hail Mary. It's like, if we don't get into accelerator, it's over. We just simply don't have any more money left. And we were fortunate enough we got rejected from every accelerator that we applied to. But what we did, which is back to one of our values about showing up, David, is we got invited to interview at 500 startups in California. And what we did was we got on an airplane and we met them in person for literally, I think it was not even a 30-minute interview. And I remember Parker Thompson, he was at the time, he was the partner at 500 Startups. He basically thought it was wild that we would get on an airplane to go see and visit with them, for such a small period of time. And ultimately, that was one of the reasons that they accept us into 500 Startups, right? And so we got into 500 Startups. Then we moved to the Bay Area. And there were 2 real things there that changed the trajectory of the company forever. One, we actually were alive because we got a check. So we had money in the bank. But the second is going through an accelerator in San Francisco and being part of the SF tech scene completely changed our perspective on just the field overall, the amount of energy, the different types of projects and companies that people were building, and actually moving to a town where the main industry was technology. It was extraordinarily invigorating. And so from there, that gave us a bit of life. I got married right after that, and then moved back to New York. And it would be at that point in time, after 500 Startups, we failed to raise the seed round. I should add in there too. So we graduated 500 Startups, failed to raise the seed round, moved back to New York. We had our backs against the wall again. And we finally were then able to find product market fit. And it was really based off of learning about all the different things over the past 3 years, and putting it together into a product. After we found product market fit, we went on a really nice run up until COVID.
John, how bad did it get during that period? I mean,
David, it's all a blur. It's all a blur. Anthony, I know, likes to look forward and not backward on these things, but it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. When you're dealing with constant rejection over and over and people telling you can't do something, it's ugly. It's ugly. And I think for me and Anthony, there were times where we worked so hard on something. I literally put everything I had into it, and then the whole thing would just completely fail. And we tried all these different products, and I think then the people that are rooting for you are like your family. But at the end of the day, then they don't even care anymore because they're like, what are they doing? They should just get jobs. They're only excited for 6 months. But I think with Anthony and myself, the rejection made us stronger over time. And I say that to a lot of entrepreneurs. If you can get to a certain point in time, if you just keep going and give yourself that chance, you usually can get there. But there's no clock. There's no guaranteed outcomes. And I think you have to learn to enjoy the process, David, in order to do it. And I remember myself and Anthony at the time starting to say things like, we will not be denied. We will not be denied. We're just going to keep going and nothing is going to stop us. And then when all those little things started to happen, they started just kind of be like, okay, I expect it to happen. And you're dodging these grenades versus being like, oh my God, like this happened. It's terrible. And like feeling sorry about it. So I think we really got stronger. But early on, David, it was really tough. You're watching your bank account go down. You're in your 20s. You're in New York City. Everybody's out, doing their thing. And you're just like picking up laptops and and trying to do that. It was definitely something that, will stay with me for forever.
Yeah, one thing I also kind of want to add to it is looking back on it, it was actually the best thing in the world that could have happened to us, David. And the reason why is because that 3-year time period was to this day still 10 times harder than anything that we've had to deal with. And, doing this for 12 years is, with any company, there's a lot of ups and downs. There's cycles, there's periods of growth, there's periods of, having to rebuild the product and all of those things that most companies, or almost all companies go through, if you stand the test of time. But actually creating that as the foundational perspective, John and I, throughout all the challenges, always joke around and say, it's not that bad. It's not really that bad. And so the stories that were really, really, really challenging and tough to get through, actually are in somewhat today quite endearing when we're dealing with some of the different challenges and opportunities that we have in the business. But we didn't obviously know that at the time. So.
And let's talk about, I want to get into details because when I've heard this story, there's just some details to this that are amazing. So obviously you're in a hardware business and so you need space and you need to do stuff with the hardware that you're picking up from your customers. And what did you do if you didn't rent space, right? If you couldn't rent a WeWork, you couldn't rent a warehouse, where did you put the hardware that you were picking up in those early days when you didn't have any money? Anthony, maybe you should be the one probably to tell this story.
We used to use a place called Extra Space Storage that was on 143rd and Malcolm X in Harlem. There are a couple of things about the setting. One, there's no heat in the units. They just heat enough so the pipes don't freeze. So it's 40 degrees in the unit in the wintertime. There's no electricity. And there's no lighting in the units. And so what we actually did, it was literally like out of a movie. We had this 100-foot extension cord. And the extension cord was hooked up to like a lighting system, like a little space heater, all different types of like refurbishing tools that we used to use. And so basically you would open up the unit, walk, 50 feet, down the hallway, and plug into, just some outlet. And then the whole entire unit would just like light up, right? It was like everything would like turn on. And we spent a lot of our time there and, that's where we worked out of, we had fold out tables. It was like this whole entire, setup that we used as our MVP, if you will.
So that was your office. That was your first office.
That was our first office, our first processing facility.
The storage space.
Yeah. We were there, also at the time too, we just worked 7 days a week. So, we were there every single Saturday and Sunday. And we literally used to, shut the place down. Matter of fact, one time, we were in there and we lost track of time and we're working. And then we realized all the hallway lights had been shut down and the elevators had been shut down. And they have a very hard stop time, whatever it is, like 6 p.m., 7 p.m., etc. And John and I looked at each other and we're like, oh my God, it's, 6:15, 6:10, whatever. I think we're locked in here, right? Because the elevators are down, the lights are off. And cut a long story short, I like ran down the exit stairway. They actually learned why exit stairways exist. This is an example of why that is so. You're running down like the exit stairway, and literally we caught the lady that was closing it down. Literally, she was locking up the gate, and we're like, God. We're still inside the unit. And she turned on the elevator, and we were able to close down the units. But it was wild. In Extra Space.
So when you were figuring out product market fit early on, a lot of people that are really, I'm saying the very early stages of a company, it's hard to get that first set of customers. And I think that a lot of people talk about, how do I build my sales process and how do I do this to get, the first 50 customers, 100 customers. How did you go about in those early days, John, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got that first set of customers that you had, and how you did things that I may or may not be repeatable, at that stage. How did you do that? Or like
Yes.
details?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing we did was, um, we met every customer in person in, like, the first or second meeting.
How'd you get to them in person?
So, like, we would send the emails and, like, let's say, like, they were like, "Oh, let's get on a call." We'll be like, "We wanna meet you in person. We'll come to your
Mm,
office." And that was, a very unusual thing for a lot of these IT people, and this could be an IT company, this could be an IT person at a company with, like, 50 or 100 people, and they may have never even met any of their vendors, and we'd go there. Not only
mhm.
would we go there, we would, always bring them stuff like, cupcakes or something like that as, like, a thank you for taking the meeting with us, and then we would just literally ask them for feedback, learn from them, write them a handwritten thank you card, and then we would do the same process over and over again. We did that so many times, David, where I think it just compounded into what Revivin is today. But in the early days, getting that face to face time and then going back to that person and saying, "Hey, we were doing this, but we listened to your feedback. We realized that was not a good idea. And now we're doing it this way."
Mm,
You get
mm.
so much trust off of that where you're like, they're actually listening to me. Every other vendor is just like throwing this stuff, at me and saying I have to do it a certain way. The first thing that I love leading these combos with is like, what are we doing wrong? Like, what could we be doing better? Give us feedback. And when you get that feedback and say, "Hey, I'll be back here in 6 months. I need time," but then and continue that conversation, you really build trust and a reputation for yourself that I think cannot be replicated.
Were you open with these customers about where you were in terms of stage of the company, or did you present yourself as some big company? And how open were you with them
Yeah, that
in the
that's a
beginning?
really good thing. So I'm a very open person in general. I would say that we weren't in explicit details that like it's just myself and Anthony. You have to fake it till you make it a little bit in terms of that, especially when you're doing a sales call, you're going on the pickup, you're going in the elevator. So, I remember there was funny stories where we'd be in the elevator together and if I was the sales guy, the customer would be like, "That guy John, really nice guy, that I've talked to, but I'm in the elevator with him and Anthony's there, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that guy. He works at Revive, and I know him." So there's definitely some of that
Mm.
happening, David. But at the same time, I think what we also did was a customer would say, "Hey, I need you to pick up hardware for me in Japan." And we would never say, "Hey, we have this facility in Japan." We'd be like, "That's an interesting problem. Oh, you have that? Let's look into it. How can we do it?" And then I would say, "Here's how you can do it now. We're not ready for that at that stage, but we will get there." And a
Mm.
lot of those early requests from certain customers helped us build the footprint logistically for Reviving today, where we're now able to collect, process, and resell and repurpose hardware on basically every continent.
Wow. Um, let's talk about the bootstrapping piece of this, because I think, if I understand the story, you really didn't have a choice whether you bootstrapped or not, at least in the early days. In the early days, Anthony, from your story, you couldn't raise a seed round, you couldn't get people to invest. What do you think about bootstrapping? Do you think that it's been good for the business? Do you wish that you were able to raise money early on?
If I look back in hindsight, love bootstrapping, highly a fan. I think also it's one of those things where after you bootstrap for a while, so long as you're profitable, most companies, if they bootstrap, get to a point of profitability where you have an excess amount of capital to reinvest back into the business. And I actually don't think, so long as you want to grow the business, it acts that much different than a general high growth company that did raise money. But if I were to go back, sure, why wouldn't I have taken $2 or $3 million and paid myself a salary, and John would have paid a salary and not been in the storage unit and not been in the facility. I don't necessarily think it would have changed the outcome at all. I don't think it would have changed just having to clear a very small preference stack, in that
Hmm.
regard. But I think the essence of the question is, the way in which I take it is, do we regret like not raising substantial capital? And the answer is absolutely not. And we really love the fact that we're able to build Revive in the way in which we want to do it, the Reviving way. I'm not entirely sure, if we had a board, that consisted of 5 or 6 people that all read
Hmm.
Series A, B, C, if we'd be able to do it.
John, what about you? You spend a lot of time, talking to a lot of founders and people who've raised a bunch of money, people who haven't. What's your view on this? Would you recommend to people that they do bootstrap, that they don't bootstrap, that they, what would your recommendation be to you and Anthony 12 years ago, who are starting a company today? What would your recommendation be?
Yeah, so I think similar to what Anthony said, I agree with him there. Like if we could have had a little bit of money, why not? But at the same time, we are so lucky that we weren't able to raise money. And I think it's one of those things that, and it seems so obvious in hindsight, but at the time was so difficult. Because I think also, David, what you see in startups, and especially for people coming out of college or in your 20s, it's like, how do I get that fundraising article? How do I get that article that says
Mm.
I raised seed round? I remember sitting there and Anthony and I are working so hard and just trying and trying. And then all the other founders are like 1.7. And I'm like, 1.7 what? And they're like, seed, 2, 3. Another company's raising 7. And it's like, you just hear this and you can't even get a meeting with these people. And you're like, nobody likes our business. Everybody's saying that this like hardware, we're co-CEOs, we're non-technical. Basically, people keep telling you can't do it. And for myself personally, this might not be a good thing. I just really feed off that energy and that motivation. And all the times when they say that, it just makes me go further and go stronger. So I still think we would be here today and with that little bit of comfort. But I think that the more like we got pushed down in those early days, the more energy kind of like got pent up in Reviving, where we were like, we're gonna do this regardless. And the special thing was when people did want to give us money at that time, David, after I think we saw that why, and then we realized, wow, this is so special to be able to do it the Reviving way and control our own destiny now and have our own capital. Like Anthony said, we don't feel like we're undercapitalized. We have money to reinvest back into the business. When you're profitable, there's so much you can do in making those decisions, and that's a really awesome thing to be able to do.
Do you tell people, back to the point of hiring and bringing people on board, do you tell people this very openly? I mean, is this something
Oh
that
yes,
in the interview process you're telling people we're profitable, we're bootstrapped?
I think one of the questions I ask is, who are you interviewing with? Are you interviewing for a high growth job or a bootstrap company, and why? And I
Mm.
think to Anthony's point, it's like, what are your motivations? Do you want to join a company that's going through the alphabet, or do you just want to be part of something that long term is going to be an iconic brand, business, and great experience for customers and the employees that work there? Because when you look at that, I think Anthony may have mentioned this before. I always say this: great companies have been built without capital, but not without people. So when you look at the essentials to a startup formula, capital is not one of them. It may be for certain types of businesses, but having the right people at the right time that want to do it for the right reasons is ultimately what makes a team successful.
Yeah, I think what you said there, I agree with, which is for certain types of businesses, there's probably a need for capital in a way that doesn't exist for other types of businesses. But if you're a type of business that doesn't need that capital, if you can bootstrap, man, it really changes so many things. I mean, it changes how you run the business. It changes the optionality for you in terms of what you want to do with the business. It really is it's powerful. And I think that's the question, is people really asking themselves, what kind of business am I gonna try to build here? And do I need the capital? And if I do, I really need the capital? And what does that mean for me in terms of a structure of the business? So okay, in a second, I want to transition to your backgrounds a little bit more and your stories and your life stories. Before that, I want to ask each of you one question, which is, what are you excited for the future of Revivin, as you look forward? So maybe we'll start with you, Anthony. What are you excited for?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that, I'm excited for is I believe we have this opportunity of truly building a global, sustainable, iconic brand that lasts generations to come. And I genuinely believe that we can do that. And so, I say this all the time where, you think about recycling, right? You think about, green being for paper, blue being for plastic. What is that color for electronics, right? One of the fastest growing waste streams in the entire world. And that color and our goal is to make it orange. And so
Mm.
I genuinely believe that's an opportunity. I think that opportunity is larger than even us or the company itself. I think it's part of a larger movement and something that's really important to us and definitely really important to me.
Awesome. John, what are you excited about?
Yeah, so on the business side specifically, I think that hardware is becoming more and more difficult to repair, which is really interesting because that's become a competitive advantage for Reviving in a circular economy. So
Mm,
when you look at things that OEMs are doing, there's something called the right to repair, which is a very popular movement about giving access to parts and manuals so you can repair your hardware. There's no reason why we shouldn't be repairing hardware and refurbishing hardware. It's an electronic that's sitting somewhere unused that if refurbished and repaired, somebody else can actually change their lives. Having access to a computer and hardware changes your life fundamentally in terms of what most people are able to do. So that is just so exciting to me because when you come into our facilities and you see what the technicians are doing, and it goes from screens to trackpads to all this stuff on the software side, because we have such an ecosystem of parts and different types of computers, we're able to do repairs that other people cannot do at a
mm,
global scale. And that to me is extremely exciting. And, the other thing is always for me on the people side, it's just so cool as you get to a bigger company and you're going from not 0 to 1, but 8 to 9 figures. And it's just a different journey. There's so many more people that come through the door and watching what those people are like when they started
mm,
Reviving to kind of where they end. To me, I really form a special connection with that. And it's just so cool to, see somebody who maybe never worked at a startup or maybe, was just trying to get their first leadership role and then watching them thrive and go on in their career and their life. To me, watching that happen, it's kind of like, you're like a coach and you have like different roster of players
mm.
that come through. And then you're like the coach that's been there for a long time. So I think of that a lot for myself. And I really enjoy that, David.
One of the things you said there, I just want to key on is you talked about how hardware can change someone's life. Can you just go maybe one level deeper on that statement? Like, what have you seen it change people's lives? Whose life? How?
Yeah, totally. So I think when you look at the nonprofits and organizations that Revivin supports, many of these people don't have access to a computer. I think that we take it for granted that we're walking around New York City with a laptop, an iPad, an iPhone, and so forth. We have requests for technology access every single day, and when we're able to fulfill those requests now through our software platform, so it's actually really cool. If you're a nonprofit or an organization, school that needs computers, you can actually list your org on our software, and then the companies Revivin works with can choose the organization to provide the hardware to, and we facilitate the
Hmm.
whole process. So it used to be back in the day, a lot of these companies always wanted to donate hardware, David. They basically would do it themselves. They would like get a truck, try to drop it off somewhere and so forth. And when Revivin came into the market, we're like, hey, we can do that for you. We're doing this with hundreds of thousands of machines a year. Tell us what nonprofits, what orgs are out there. And I've watched that happen now over and over again. And to me, that feeling people get when they're like, wow, I have a laptop now. I can
Hmm.
like apply for a job on my computer. It seems such a basic thing that I think that we overlook sometimes.
All right, let's talk about you guys a little bit more. Anthony, starting with you, can you just tell me a little bit about your upbringing? Your parents. Where you from originally? Just quick high level. Background on your story.
Totally. Born in Manhattan. Grew up in a town called Eastchester, which not a lot of people have heard of, but it's a town right in between Yonkers and New Rochelle. So it's in the southernmost part of Westchester County. Um, I got the best family that anyone in the world could have ever asked for. I
Hmm.
got my mom was a nurse. She actually just recently retired. And my father was a school teacher. And I kind of had that upbringing of where I grew up in the same house, my whole life. They moved from Manhattan to the suburbs before I have any memory of it. And I just grew up with me and my brother, in bunk beds,
Hmm.
all the way through. And my parents had, a very, very strong value system. And, for them, the most important thing for my brother and I were to be excellent students and to also be highly productive members of society. It was used to joke around about that. Like you have to contribute. And so, early on, and that was from, helping out working in my grandfather's lumberyard, My father had a small accounting business. I used to, go up to the attic and help out with him. And then that got converted to, the second I was able to work, I think it was as early as 12 years old, I was umpiring baseball games, at TYA, Tucko Youth Association baseball, where, I played a lot of ball growing up as a kid. And that really started, the work ethic, that's been, quite helpful.
Hmm. Did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur at a young age, or?
So what started to happen was I started off my first jobs was, umpiring baseball games. It was refereeing soccer games. There was a local real estate company that I basically would answer phones for, hand keys out. There's a lot of key exchanges, kind of going on there. And then I got what I thought was this great job, it was working at, a country club. And that's when I started to make kind of like the most amount of money that I'd ever made. And so that's where I started getting involved with the earlier phases of eBay. And my first business was I launched a used auto parts store on
Hmm.
eBay. And so if people
At
were
what age? At what age?
16,
Wow.
right, or 16, pretty young. And that was really successful. And so take OEM parts, so parts that came with a car. And if someone was altering their car parts, putting in different taillights, rims, all the different auto body shops, I would take those parts and I would resell them. And then in certain instances, sometimes people would actually ask us for money for them. And because was making money at the country club, I had a little bit of cash in my back pocket, and I was able to purchase them, knowing that I'd be able to go resell those parts. So that was my one of my first ventures. I also had a tutoring business as well that I had when I was 16. It was literally like the second I got a car, I just became basically a full-time entrepreneur. You know what I mean? Once I was able to move around, right? Because like dinner wasn't as prevalent, right, as it is now, right?
Right, right.
It's really interesting because it's kind of like if I grew up in a different era, would I actually just be a developer and all my businesses would have been online?
Mm, mm.
Like probably to some extent, right? And so, yeah, I had a bunch of different businesses, and I always had a bunch of different side hustles. And you know, the truth is, by the time I was at the end of high school, I was making actually like real money for that that period of time, right? So like,
Wow.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
John, how about you? What's your story?
Yeah, so I grew up in Harrison, New York, in Westchester County, actually very close to Anthony. We didn't meet till college, but we grew up very close to each other. I think in a similar environment. Um, my family was very old school. Is very old school. Very Italian. I'm a first gen, so my dad's an immigrant. Came here in his 20s. He's a barber, so he would work 6 days a week basically. Saturdays he would work. I worked a lot. My mom she was a stay-at-home mom and then worked in a nurse's office. So when I was in middle school, I think she started working as like a health assistant or kind of like a
Mm,
secretary. And growing up for me, my parents we were tough. It was like I had to definitely earn it in terms of like what I wanted to do and accomplish for myself. And I remember in like fifth grade, I took life and careers like a class, and like you fill out all these questions, and it was just like CEO. It just, like, was right on there,
really?
like, entrepreneur, CEO, and I also really love sports growing up and, like, and coach and I love, like, the coaching and the motivation of it, and I feel like entrepreneurship is that perfect combination of all those things that you get, like, if you're not, like, a professional athlete in your life.
What did for you, John? What is it that like deep down, what is it that motivates you? Again, you both have already talked about just the Revivin story and the challenges along the way. Like, what keeps you going? What is it's your core? What drives you?
Um, I think, there's a lot of things with it, but I think at the core, I love showing other people what's possible through like inspiration, perspective, and positive affirmation. So I think about inspiration a lot and how I get inspiration from other people. And
Mm,
I think there's like almost like a duty for entrepreneurs to like pay that forward to other people. So whenever I get so much energy, you mentioned like taking these meetings with other companies and people. When I meet that founder that's like 6 months in, a year in, and they're going, that gives me the energy to be like, I'm not working enough right now. Like, what's going on with me? Like, what can I be doing? And then I meet somebody who's 100 times more successful than me, and they keep pushing themselves. So I think it's just like, you can't take it for granted. Anthony says this, where like every athlete has this career, and he's like, it lasts a certain amount of time. And you have like your prime years in your career. And for myself and Anthony, I feel like we're like in our prime years of our career right now.
Mm.
Like we have the opportunity to build a massive organization that scales for years to come, doing it the Revivin way, the way that we want to do it. And to me, ultimately at core, that's such a driver. When I
Mm.
think about like where I came from and like where I started to where I am now, I just feel an immense sense of gratitude for that.
Mm. Anthony, you mentioned before you got married at the early days of Revivin. Um, how is it to do that, to get married, to enter into a lifelong partnership while entering into a could be lifelong partnership work wise, and dedicating your life to work? Like how did you handle that? How did your wife handle that? You now have kids. How do they handle that? That it's what a lot of entrepreneurs go through. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first I have 2 wives. I have John and then I have Angela. So I have 2 wives. But Angela's always been the most supportive person, throughout the entire journey. Matter of fact, after we got married, we still didn't find product market fit and had no money. And literally she literally paid the rent in our apartment while allowing John and I to continue to pursue,
Wow.
the dream of Revivin, right? And so she has not only been, an actual supporter of myself, but she's really actually put a little bit of her, blood, sweat, and tears into the company as well, through the continuous support of myself and enabling us to do so. So she's been fantastic, and I'm really lucky. And then, yeah, I mean, I have 3 kids, right? I have my oldest daughter's 5, and then I have identical twin girls that are 3. And it's really challenging. I think that there's been a couple of things that we've done that have been hacks that have made our lives a little bit easier because, as you know, David, kids are the greatest thing in the entire world. Um, but, in terms of creating the headspace to be a great dad and to be a great husband, or at least that I aspire to be, and also a great son to my mom, and then also being the best CEO. There's only so much time in the day, and so I think one of the things that works really well for us is, we both live and work in Brooklyn. So I can get to work in 10 minutes, and we've built a flow. And I think actually with really young kids, there's a lot of ambiguity, and the one constant is change. So I think just embracing it kind of on both ends of the spectrum has been has been uh, has been really amazing. And
Mm.
I'm really fortunate in that regard.
John, we talked about the challenges work wise. What challenges have you faced? What do you think is the biggest challenge you face personally? As you've grown up and going through your childhood, even to your adulthood, like what's the biggest challenge you faced and how have you overcome that?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I had a hearing loss my whole life. So from when I was like in elementary school, I had an FM system. So I had to like go to the teacher, give the teacher a microphone, and then I wore something on my ear to direct it right to there. Then I got hearing aids, and then when I was 16, I got evaluated for a cochlear implant. I had too much good hearing at the time. College went on. After college, I lost all my hearing basically. So when this was like maybe 3 years out of college, I got the cochlear implant, and my speech comprehension went from like at the time was down to 10% to like up to 90 today. And to me, for that sticks out as like the challenge I had to overcome. I remember mentally thinking, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? I can't hear. And I was always so very motivated in my job. I really was ambitious. And the story I always tell is Anthony was very supportive throughout that time period. And I would read lips a lot during those days. If I wasn't looking at you, I basically couldn't communicate. And after I got the cochlear implant, I got it activated. We were roommates. Anthony just looked at me and he was like, "No excuses,"
Mm.
and let's go. And I think to this day, that's on the wall at Revivin, like no excuses. And I think a lot of people, everybody has different obstacles, Steve. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like, this is hard, that's hard. And I don't like to compare my thing versus somebody else's. Like whatever your thing is, you have to overcome that. But if you can't have perspective on where you are and use and control your mindset to get through those challenges in life, then you're not going to be able to progress forward in these things. So for me, the advantage I had was entrepreneurship came a little bit easier, I think, because I was always an entrepreneur in the room as a kid, trying to figure out how to hear, where do I have to sit, how do I navigate the conversation
Mm,
in
mm.
college and so forth. So it's kind of like you're crafty with it. And when you're starting a company, it's very similar early on where things go wrong. When you're at dinner and you can't hear, things go wrong. You got to like shift yourself and like narrate the conversation. And that for me has been, it's a big part of who I am.
Mm. I mean, I said in the beginning when I was introducing you, I think the grit, the resilience, the drive that you guys have is amazing, and I think you've talked a lot about that. I the the big question I have for both of you, maybe we'll start with you, Anthony. If you could go back to yourself, I would say even before Reviving, let's say when you're starting your career, you come out of Villanova, you're starting your career, um, knowing everything you know today, what would you go back and tell yourself that right when you graduated? What would you go tell yourself?
Sure. It would definitely be that the highs are never as good as they seem, and the lows are never as bad as they seem. And the controlling point is the input. It's making sure every single day you show up, put in the work, and do so with an incredible amount of intentionality. And I know it
Mm,
sounds simple, but I think that we all throughout our careers, we look at things and we're like, wow, this is incredibly challenging. How are we going to get through this? Right. Well, my advice there is there's always an angle. There's always an angle. There's always a way, but you have to just figure out what that is and control the inputs, right?
mm,
And then when
mm,
things are going fantastic, it's always easy to say, hey, look, wow, look at that quarter. It was fantastic, incredible, right? But usually what happens is whenever you experience the next challenge, there's probably something ongoing on during that quarter that you didn't necessarily pick up. And so maybe it wasn't actually as good as what the number said, right? Or something like that. So I think it's really about trying to have that degree of self-control because it is a long game. A
yeah,
career is a
yeah,
long game.
yeah. I like that a lot. I like the highs are not as high and the lows are not as low as you think. I think that's actually um, the more time I spend with early stage founders. I think a lot of people could that could be on their computer, like on their in front of them every day because it is it's hard actually to go on this path that's like, oh my God, we won this huge deal. Oh my God, we lost this huge deal. We're going out of business. Oh my God, we released this feature. It's going to change everything. Oh my God, this feature's delayed by 2 months and we're going to go out of business. Like, you kind of like go through that and it's hard to do it while you're in it, but that's really good advice. John, how about you? What's that advice you'd give your younger self?
Yeah, so for me, it's definitely compromise and patience. I was actually pretty good on the patience part. Compromise is hard for me. I very much wanted things done like a certain way at a certain time,
Mm,
in a certain place. And I think when you let go of that and are an outcome focused and you're just like trust the process for the long term, everything does work itself out. So
mm,
I think that's really important. I also think that you just have to keep going and not give up on things. So I remember being in my first job, I was so frustrated by the bureaucracy that was going on there. But ultimately, if I didn't experience that, I probably never would have built Revivin. So it's like all part of your path along the way. And I think sometimes people look at the setting they're in and they're like, this is like, I'm stuck here. They feel like stuck in certain things.
mm.
And it's like, actually, that's just part of the path that you're on. And you have to figure that out for yourself. But then you can't make excuses and just stay there. You have to create change for yourself if you want to be in a different position or place.
Mm.
And in early stage startups, all that happens is change. We changed. I was in 7 different apartments. I lived in all these different places. Like I remember there was one year with Anthony when he got back from getting married, and I just got a place on the Upper West Side because he was living on the Upper West Side, but I didn't even have furniture. I just got it for 2 months and subletted it. But the whole point was you just got to do what you got to do to make that work if you really want to do it. And then if you do that, I do believe things go from it's impossible to unlikely to your success is inevitable over
Mhm.
again the longer period of time. You have to take that 10-year journey. And early on, it's funny because investors say, can you do this for 10 years or 20 years? And I remember getting that question and being like, yeah, we could definitely do it. And honestly, at the time, I didn't really believe it. I had no idea how long I could do something for. And now looking back at it, I know, when I'm talking to somebody, you can do it for that long. You just have to have that marathon mindset and the right
Mm,
mentality to push yourself through the ups and downs, as Anthony was saying.
mm. Awesome. Guys, this has been amazing. John, if people want to connect with Revivin, if they want to connect with you guys, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. You can find us on LinkedIn, revivin.com, email. Anthony and I are very responsive to things. And then I'm also on Twitter at Faz, Fazz. I love Twitter. I'm on there a lot too.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Anthony. This was amazing. Thank you to everyone who's listening. If you found this interesting, if you learned something, if you enjoyed, please share this episode. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.